The wind moved across the plains like a whisper from another life, gentle, dry, and haunting. It stirred the dust around the edges of the broken fence, rustled through the dying stalks of prairie grass, and slid under the brim of Elias McGraw's weathered hat, pulling at him like memory. He didn't flinch. He rarely did anymore. He stood still at the edge of his ranch, squinting into the orange haze of the early evening sun. His boots, cracked and scuffed from years of neglect, pressed into the hardened dirt, and his long fingers gripped a rusted fence post wrapped in barbed wire. It was the same fence he repaired last week. The same one. The wind, or a cow, or maybe just time, had decided to bend out of shape again. Elias worked in silence. Always silence. There was no one to speak to but his horse and the slow creak of wood settling under the weight of years. He had once been a man who drew crowds, who had a voice in saloons and faces around every campfire. That was a lifetime ago. Now, the only sounds that accompanied him were the call of distant hawks and the creaking wood of his lonesome homestead. He adjusted the post, hammering it into the dirt with the practiced strength of habit. His movements were slow but precise. There was no rush. Time out here moved like molasses through snow, heavy, reluctant, and indifferent to men's ambitions. After securing the fence, Elias wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned against it, scanning the horizon. His land ran all the way to the tree line of the South Ridge, a ragged patch of wilderness that had always made the local townsfolk uneasy. Not because of the trees, or even the wolves that sometimes howled at night, but because beyond that tree line began Comanche territory. It wasn't marked on any map, and no one dared build fences there. The land simply changed. Most settlers avoided the area entirely, but Elias wasn't most settlers. He hadn't picked this place for its charm or its safety. He'd picked it because no one came here. And because if anyone did, they wouldn't be looking for the kind of man he used to be. He ran a hand through his silver-threaded hair, fingers pausing over the scar just above his left temple. A gift from the past. He didn't like thinking about it. He didn't like thinking about anything, really. Life was easier when he kept his mind on chores and the empty sky. He turned back toward the barn, whistling low to signal his horse. The chestnut mare came trotting over the ridge, her saddle worn, her gait steady. He mounted without a word, guiding her down the slope to check the lower boundary where the ravine cut through his property. As the trail narrowed and the ground dipped, Elias felt a subtle shift in the air. The breeze grew cooler, the scent of damp earth stronger. The gulch ahead had always been a tricky patch, soft in places, prone to erosion. Cattle avoided it by instinct, but Elias checked it regularly to make sure no strays wandered too far. Then he heard it. A sound carried on the wind, faint, broken, not quite a word. A cry? His head tilted. It came again, softer but unmistakable. A human voice. He slowed the mare, boots dragging in the dust as he scanned the ridgeline. The cry came again, sharper now, with panic behind it. Elias dismounted and moved toward the gulch on foot, stepping carefully. The grass thinned here, the earth darker, looser. He moved with the caution of a man who's seen what nature does to the unwary. Then, just beyond a thicket of brush, he saw him. A boy, no older than 10, maybe, his arms flailing as he struggled to keep his upper body above the surface of what looked like cracked, black earth. But it wasn't earth. Not solid. The boy was chest deep in quicksand, sinking inch by inch, panic etched into every line of his face. Elias froze. The child's skin was copper-toned, his hair black and tangled, his clothes torn and wet with mud. His eyes locked onto Elias's, wide with terror, pleading. "Help!" the boy cried, the word thick with a heavy accent, but clear enough. Elias's pulse spiked, his breath catching in his throat. Quicksand. It was rare, but not a myth. If the boy kept struggling, he'd sink faster. And he was Comanche. Elias's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed caution. Helping him could mean drawing the wrath of the tribe. Or worse, the townsfolk finding out. A white man aiding an enemy? They'd burn his ranch to the ground. But the boy was just a boy. Elias scanned the area. No sign of warriors. No sign of anyone. He could walk away. No one would ever know. The boy would vanish into the gulch like a dropped stone. The child's voice cracked again. "Please!" Elias cursed under his breath, already moving. His boots dug into the edge of the gulch as he grabbed his lasso from the saddle. He circled wide, finding firmer ground above the pit, then coiled the rope and threw. It missed. He hauled it back, hands shaking now, not from fear, but urgency. The boy was deeper now, mud reaching his shoulders. "Grab it!" Elias shouted on the second throw. This time the loop landed over the boy's shoulders. The boy wrapped his arms through it with desperate fingers. Elias braced himself against a boulder, planting his feet, then pulled. At first, the boy didn't budge. Elias gritted his teeth and heaved harder, muscles straining, jaw clenched. "Don't struggle," he barked. "Let me pull." The boy whimpered but obeyed. Slowly, agonizingly, Elias dragged him out, inch by inch. Mud sucked at the boy like a hungry beast, trying to keep its prize, but Elias didn't stop. When the boy's chest broke free, Elias dug in harder, pulling with every ounce of strength he had. Finally, with a wet, slurping sound, the child broke loose and collapsed in a heap at the edge of the pit, gasping and trembling. Elias dropped the rope, falling to his knees beside him. The boy was shivering, coated in mud, arms scraped and legs raw. But he was alive. Elias stared at him, breathing hard. "Where's your camp?" he asked. The boy didn't respond. Either he didn't understand, or he was too scared to speak. Elias sighed. "All right, kid, you're coming with me." He lifted the boy carefully, cradling him in strong arms as he carried him to the mare. The child didn't fight, didn't resist, just clung to Elias's shirt with shaking fingers. Once mounted, Elias rode back to the ranch, the boy leaning against his chest, half conscious. The sun dipped below the hills as they reached the barn. Elias dismounted and carried the child inside, laying him gently on a pile of straw. He fetched a blanket, a canteen of water, and one of his old shirts. The boy watched him with wary eyes, too exhausted to speak. Elias knelt beside him. "You're safe here. Just rest. Ain't nobody gonna hurt you tonight." He offered the water. The boy drank greedily. Elias leaned back against a beam, watching the shadows creep across the wooden walls. Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering across the prairie. The boy coughed and curled under the blanket. Elias didn't sleep. He just sat there, listening to the soft breathing of a child who should have been his enemy, but was just another soul trying not to die alone. And for the first time in years, Elias McGraw didn't feel like the loneliest man on earth. The storm didn't come with rain, it came in wind, long, moaning gusts that battered the roof of the barn and rattled loose planks like dry bones chattering in the dark. Elias McGraw sat still in the corner, his back against a support beam, eyes fixed on the boy curled beneath the blanket. The Comanche child hadn't spoken since he'd arrived. Not a word, not a whisper. But he hadn't tried to run either. That counted for something. The barn was warm enough from the body heat of Elias's mare, the scent of old hay, and the faint smoke drifting in from the chimney of the house. Outside, the wind howled like some restless spirit circling the prairie in search of a place to die. Elias hadn't slept. His bones ached, his shoulders burned from pulling the child out of the quicksand, and yet he didn't move. He watched the boy breathe, shallow at first, ragged, but steady now. The kid's hands were balled up beneath his cheek, streaked with dried mud and bruises, his lips cracked from thirst. Elias had cleaned him up as best he could. A rag, a bucket of water, one of his old shirts torn down the middle. He hadn't expected visitors. He hadn't expected anyone. The wind creaked through the eaves. The horse shifted her weight, her hooves clacking on the wood floor, a reminder of life. Sometime before dawn, Elias drifted off. It wasn't sleep, not really, just a flicker of darkness behind the eyes, a slip into silence. When he opened them again, light filtered in through the warped barn slats. pale and cold. The boy was gone. Elias stood fast, boots thudding the planks, heart leaping to the base of his throat. The blanket lay crumpled where the boy had been. No sound, no trace. Just the emptiness of a space recently occupied. He pushed open the barn doors and scanned the ranch. No tracks. Just wind blowing through the dry grass, the sun rising behind the low hills. A coyote yelped somewhere in the far distance, but there was no movement. No sign of the child. "Kid," he called out. "Hey, you out here?" Nothing. Just the groan of the wind pushing through the trees along the gulch. He circled the house, checked the edge of the corral, then climbed the low ridge near the barn to get a better view. His heart was beating faster now, not with fear, but with something else. Guilt, maybe. Or worry. He didn't know the boy, had no idea why he was out there alone. But the thought of him wandering off, hurt or worse, taken, stung deeper than he expected. On the porch, he found it. Not the boy. Just an object. A single feather, long, striped in black and white, with the barest tip dyed red. Placed with care on the porch rail, centered, not dropped, not forgotten, left. Elias stared at it, unmoving. It was no ordinary feather. He knew enough of Comanche ways to understand what it meant. A feather like that was a sign, a gesture of honor, a symbol. You didn't give one lightly, not to outsiders. He picked it up, held it between two fingers, and turned it toward the rising sun. Then he went inside, closed the door, and locked it behind him. That day passed like the others. Chores, mending, silence. But it carried weight. Elias kept glancing toward the horizon, toward the gulch, toward the tree line. Waiting, watching. By evening, he'd almost convinced himself it had been a dream. The boy, the quicksand, the feather, all of it. His mind playing tricks after too many years alone. But the scratches on his arms said otherwise. So did the child-sized footprints near the barn, ones he'd noticed after the wind had calmed. 3 days passed. On the 4th morning, Elias saddled up and rode to town. He didn't like town. Never had. Too many eyes, too many questions. But he needed supplies. More beans, more salt, nails for the busted hinge on the back gate. And maybe, just maybe, he'd listen for word, for rumors, for signs. The town hadn't changed. It never did. A row of dusty buildings, a crooked church steeple, and a street that smelled like horse piss and tobacco. Kids ran barefoot past the livery stable, and old men played checkers outside the saloon. Life went on like it always had. Predictable. Simple. He tied off the mare near the general store and stepped inside. The bell rang as he entered. "McGraw," the shopkeeper said with a nod. "Ain't seen you in weeks." "Didn't miss much," Elias replied, brushing dirt from his coat. "Still got that sack of barley?" The shopkeeper handed it over without asking questions. But not everyone was as polite. As Elias loaded up his items, a voice drifted in from the door. "Word is, Comanche been seen out past Miller's Ridge." Elias paused, back still turned. "Whole damn hunting party," the voice continued. "Riding fast, too fast for peaceful visits." Another man grunted. "Ain't right. Government's supposed to keep 'em west of the Brazos. Maybe they're looking for something." Elias paid for his goods and left before the conversation turned toward him. By the time he returned to the ranch, the sky was painted in purple hues. Dusk. The air was cooler, but the heat of something unseen lingered just beyond the tree line. He didn't sleep that night either. He sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, feather in hand, and just before the horizon lit with dawn, he saw them. Figures, on horseback. Silhouettes against the breaking sun. At first, just a few. Then more. And more still. A line of riders emerged from the southern hills, silent as the wind. Dozens, maybe more than 30. Some carried spears, others bows. All wore feathers in their hair, paint on their faces, and the calm stillness of those who had nothing to prove. At their head rode a tall man on a pale horse. Chief Tacoma. Elias stood. Slowly, not raising the rifle, not stepping back. The riders stopped at the edge of his fence line. Not one crossed it. Not yet. The chief dismounted first. His face was carved from stone, marked by age and dignity. He walked forward alone, hand open at his side. Not a threat. A gesture of peace. Behind him, a familiar face peeked from the crowd. The boy. Chenan, alive. Clean. Clothed in a finely stitched shirt of deer hide. His eyes met Elias's across the distance, and something passed between them. Recognition. Maybe even gratitude. Chief Tacoma stopped a dozen paces from the porch. "You are Elias McGraw," he said. It wasn't a question. Elias nodded once. "You saved my son." Another nod. "You had no reason to. You knew he was Comanche. You knew it could bring danger." "I saw a boy drowning," Elias replied. "Didn't think past that." Tacoma was silent for a moment. Then he held out his hand. In it was a small bundle wrapped in leather. Elias stepped down from the porch. The two men stood before each other. One, the ghost of the frontier, the other its living spirit. Tacoma offered the bundle. "For your kindness, we return kindness." Elias accepted it. Inside was smoked meat, dried herbs, and a stone carving of an eagle's head. More than that, it was trust. He looked up to find the riders dismounting. Some began moving toward his barn, others toward the field. They carried tools, baskets of maize, blankets. They came not with war, but with gifts. Chenan walked toward him, clutching a bundle of firewood in his small arms. He stopped beside Elias and looked up. "You didn't leave me," the boy said. Elias, for once, didn't know what to say, and for the first time in many, many years he smiled. Just a little. But enough. The sun broke through the clouds in slanted rays, casting gold across the ridgeline and setting fire to the prairie grass. For the first time in years, Elias McGraw's land wasn't empty. His fences had company. His barn, once creaking and silent, hummed with the low, rhythmic sounds of hands working, hooves stamping, and quiet voices, speaking a language Elias hadn't heard since before the war. He stood near the corral, watching a young Comanche man sharpen a fence post with a bone-handled blade. Another stacked bales of hay with smooth efficiency. Chenan knelt beside Elias's mare, cleaning her hooves with care, speaking soft words in Comanche that the animal seemed to understand better than English. The wind carried the scent of cooked maize and pine smoke from the small fires lit near the tree line, where women and children prepared meals and set up canvas shelters, though none looked permanent. They hadn't come to stay. That much Elias understood. But they had come to honor. He had no name for what he felt. Not comfort. That was too soft a word. Not pride either. It was something else. A kind of quiet awe at the order. The ease with which the tribe worked together like the pieces of a machine. Efficient, but human. Every action felt deliberate. Every gesture meant. There was no waste. No excess. Just purpose. It had been years since Elias had seen purpose outside of fixing broken things. Tacoma approached again as the afternoon lengthened. His face was lined and sun-darkened, his eyes still and sharp. He wore a cloak of buffalo hide, stitched with red thread, and at his side hung a ceremonial tomahawk, decorated with feathers and beads. Elias met him halfway across the field. "My people leave by tomorrow's dawn," Tacoma said without preamble. "We do not camp long outside our lands." "I figured," Elias replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't expect y'all to stay. Didn't expect anything, really." Tacoma's mouth tugged upward. Almost a smile. Almost. Gratitude is not always expected, but it is owed. "You saved blood of my blood." Elias's eyes drifted toward the boy. Chenan was laughing now with another child near the water trough, both of them soaked from head to toe, mud streaking their tunics. His heart twisted strangely in his chest. "I didn't think much when I pulled him out," Elias said. "Just saw a kid in trouble." And that, the chief said, is the kind of man the spirits still whisper about. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the children. Then Tacoma turned back toward his people. We will leave you with things we've made, to remember. Not because you need them, because they mean something. Elias nodded. He didn't have the words for what he felt, so he let the quiet carry it instead. By sundown, the camp had changed. Some of the temporary shelters were taken down. The tribe began packing slowly, with the same calm patience they used in everything else. But there was no rush. They moved like people who understood the rhythm of the land, not the ticking of clocks. Elias sat on the porch, sharpening his knife when Chinan approached, dragging a bundle half his size. It was wrapped in deerskin and tied with leather cord. The boy dropped it with a grunt at Elias's feet. "Made for you," he said, beaming. Elias raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" Chinan untied it carefully. Inside was a folded tunic, softly stitched, strong but lightweight. And beneath it, a small carved statue. A man on horseback, bow drawn, his body and mount one smooth shape flowing from the wood. Elias turned it in his hands. The craftsmanship was remarkable. Not showy, not ornate, just true. "Thank you," Elias murmured. "You carved this?" Chinan grinned. "I draw. Gray Bear carves. I told him you were like the silent deer who watches wolves. Brave but quiet. So we made this." Elias chuckled, a deep, gruff sound. "Not sure I deserve that kind of comparison, but I appreciate it." The boy sat down beside him, arms resting on his knees. "You live here alone?" he asked after a while. "Yeah. Why?" Elias didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air like smoke. "I lost people," he said finally. "Long time ago. Never figured out how to get 'em back." Chinan nodded solemnly, like he understood. "My mother died last winter. Sickness." Elias turned slightly. "I'm sorry." "Now it's just my father and me," the boy said. "But he says I carry her spirit. So she's not gone. Not really." The wind stirred again. Elias looked out over the prairie. The horizon had started to darken. "She sounds like she was strong." "She was," Chinan said, his voice soft. "She would have liked you." Elias looked down at the carved figure again and, for the first time in years, felt something shift deep in his chest. Not grief, not anger, something lighter. Not quite peace, but the beginning of it. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. The stars outside were too bright, the silence too full. So he stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, and listened. Then he heard the hoofbeats. Not from the camp, from the north. Faint at first, but fast. He reached for his rifle and stepped into the yard. From the shadow of the trees emerged a single rider. White man, dust-covered, riding hard. The rider pulled up fast, spooked by the campfire glow. "McGraw?" he barked. "That you?" Elias raised the rifle. "Depends who's asking." "Carter, deputy from Waco. I ride patrol up this way." Carter's eyes flicked toward the firelight in the distance, his voice tightening. "The hell's going on here? That a whole tribe on your land?" Elias didn't lower the rifle. "They're leaving in the morning." "Jesus, you're letting them just set up camp?" "I'm not letting them do anything," Elias said. "They're here because they want to be. They're not hurting anyone." Carter squinted, suspicion curdling in his voice. "Word's gotten around already, you know. Folks down in Clifton are saying you're harboring Comanche, that you made a deal." Elias took a step forward. "I saved a boy's life. That's all. They came to thank me." "That ain't how most folks will see it," Carter warned. "You've got half the town stirred up like hornets. They're scared. Then they should come see for themselves. There's nothing to be afraid of." Carter shook his head. "They won't. They'll just send someone who ain't afraid to pull a trigger." Elias's face hardened. "Then they better come ready." Carter hesitated, then turned his horse. "Just watch yourself, McGraw. You might think you're doing right, but around here, peace don't always buy you safety." He rode off into the dark. By morning, Elias was waiting. The tribe had begun breaking camp. The sky was pale, the air still. Channon was feeding the horse one last time. Tacoma approached Elias as the final carts were loaded. "I feel a shadow coming," the chief said, eyes on the road. "You're not wrong," Elias replied. "They'll come. Maybe not today, but soon." Tacoma studied him. "You know what will happen if you stand between them and us." "I've stood between bullets before," the chief nodded. "You are welcome on our land, Elias McGraw. If you are hunted, you will find protection." Elias looked him in the eyes. "Thank you. I hope it doesn't come to that." Chan ran to him and hugged his waist without warning. Elias's hand hovered awkwardly, then rested on the boy's head. "You stay safe," he said. The boy grinned. "You too, silent deer." And just like that, they were gone. Dust rose behind their horses as the tribe disappeared into the south. Elias stood alone again, carving still in hand, feather hanging over his porch. But this time, he wasn't just watching the land, he was waiting and preparing. Because he knew peace, even when earned, never came without a price. The sky burned with the color of bruised fire as the sun dropped behind the hilltops west of Elias's ranch. He stood in the doorway of the barn, arms crossed, watching the wind carry whispers through the tall grass. A few days ago, the land had been alive with the sound of Comanche voices, the rhythm of tools, and the laughter of children. Now the silence was back, but it didn't feel like it used to. Not empty, not peaceful. It felt like the pause before thunder. Elias stepped out into the yard, boots crunching on gravel. He crossed to the porch and ran his hand over the carved figure still sitting near the edge. The warrior on horseback, bow drawn, frozen in wood, in purpose. The totem hadn't moved since Channon placed it there. Elias didn't touch it. He didn't need to. It meant something as it was. A distant call from a crow echoed through the canyon. He was being watched, not by spirits, by men. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing toward the ridgeline. Nothing moved. But he knew how to read a land gone quiet. Predators hushed it, but so did fear. He reached inside the house and pulled his rifle from behind the door. It was clean, loaded, ready. Just before dusk, the first rider came over the hill. Then 2 more, and then 5. By the time the dust cleared, a dozen armed men sat on horseback at the edge of Elias's land. Their rifles were slung low, but visible. Their eyes were hard, expressions set in the kind of grim confidence that comes from talking too much and listening too little. One man rode forward, Deputy Coleridge. Elias remembered him from town. Broad-shouldered, loud, and too eager to make trouble when the badge weighed heavier than his sense. His face was red from the sun and from pride. He wore 2 pistols, both polished to the point of vanity, and a scowl that didn't quite fit the occasion. "McGraw," he called out, pulling his horse to a stop just shy of the front gate. "You got a minute?" Elias leaned against the porch post. "I've got exactly 1. You know why we're here. Because your horses were bored?" Coleridge's smile was tight, humorless. "Word is, you've been harboring Comanche, the same Comanche who've raided 3 settlements west of the Brazos. Some folks are mighty nervous." Elias said nothing. "Let the wind answer," Coleridge went on. "Now, I don't know what kind of deal you struck, but it don't look right. White man inviting a tribe to camp out on his land? Trading, laughing, fixing fences like it's some sort of partnership?" "They were thanking me," Coleridge snorted. "That right? You think gratitude makes them safe?" "They left. Peacefully. Took nothing. Broke nothing. Left this place better than they found it." "And still," Coleridge said, "folks are scared." Elias stepped off the porch. "Then tell 'em to be scared of their own ignorance," he said, "because those people did more good in 3 days than this town's done in a decade." Several of the other men shifted in their saddles, uneasy. But Coleridge stayed firm. "We came to talk. But I won't lie to you, Elias. There's others coming, with questions. some with guns. This ain't just about your ranch now. It's about precedent. You open your land to one tribe. What stops another from taking it? What stops folks from saying you're one of them? I don't care what they say. You will. Coleridge dismounted slowly and approached the fence. Elias didn't move, didn't blink. The deputy leaned against the post. "Look, McGraw," he said in a softer voice. "You used to be one of us, a damn fine marksman, scout during the war. You kept to yourself after what happened to your brother. Nobody blamed you. But this makes folks uneasy." Elias looked him in the eye. "My brother died in a crossfire between two men too proud to talk." Coleridge's jaw worked. "Fine," he muttered. "Have it your way. Just know this. When the next tribe rides through here, and it won't be one you fed beans to, you'll be on your own. We won't ride in to save you. I didn't ask you to." The deputy turned, lips tight, and mounted his horse. He gestured for the others. The group began to pull back, turning toward the road. As they rode off, one of the younger men threw a glare back over his shoulder. Elias memorized his face. Sharp chin, yellow bandana. Too young to carry hate like that, but carrying it nonetheless. They disappeared into the tree line, and with them went the last bit of light. Elias sat on the porch for a long time, rifle in hand. The fireflies danced around the edge of the barn. The wind picked up again. Just after midnight, the storm arrived. It came hard and fast, with rain like bullets and thunder that rattled the beams of the house. Lightning lit up the sky in flashes sharp enough to carve silhouettes out of darkness. Elias stood at the window, watching the wind rip through the field. Then he heard the knock 3 times. Sharp, wooden, not timid. He opened the door. A figure stood there, soaked through. Chinan. The boy looked up, shivering, hair plastered to his face, eyes wide with urgency. "They followed us," he said, breath hitching. "Men from the town. Not just one group. They came south. We saw them on the ridge." Elias grabbed his coat and the second rifle. "Where's your father?" "We split. Scouts watched them move toward your ranch. He sent me here." "They coming now?" "I don't know." Elias led him inside and lit the lantern. The storm raged louder. The wind howled like a pack of wolves. But Elias's hands were steady as he loaded shells into the Winchester. "You're staying here tonight," he told the boy, "and if they show, we don't run." Chinan didn't argue. They ate quietly in the kitchen. Dried beans, salt pork. No firewood left dry enough to burn, but the oil lamp cast a circle of warmth that kept the fear back a little. As the boy fell asleep beside the stove, Elias sat in the shadows, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the door. He didn't know when the men would return, but they would. And this time, there wouldn't be words. Only choices, the kind a man carried for the rest of his life. The storm passed like a bruise fading in reverse. First the rain, then the wind, then the weight of silence it left behind. By dawn the world was still, wet, with the memory of violence not yet arrived. The grass glistened, and pools of water gathered in the wagon ruts around the corral. The clouds hung low and gray, thick enough to choke out the sun, leaving the morning smeared with a cold, silvery light. Elias stood just outside the house with his rifle over his shoulder, eyes locked on the northern ridge. He hadn't slept. Chinan lay bundled in 2 wool blankets near the hearth inside, his breathing slow and steady. But Elias had remained at the edge of the porch, unmoving, watching the horizon for movement. And now, it came. He spotted the dust first. Not the kind the wind kicked up. This was darker. Closer. A line of it trailing behind horses that moved in tight formation. No cattle, no wagons, just riders. Their silhouettes sharpened as they crossed the hill, men with rifles and cold intentions. They weren't deputies. They weren't scouts. They were settlers. 16 of them, maybe more. Some were known names from Clifton and the outlying homesteads. Elias recognized 3 of their faces, even from this distance. One of them, the boy with the yellow bandana, had a shotgun slung across his lap. Another, older man rode with a long-barreled Sharps rifle across his saddle and a scowl carved deep into his face. They weren't coming to talk. Shannon opened the door behind Elias. "They've come," the boy said. His voice was low but calm. Elias didn't respond. He walked back into the house, set down the rifle, and opened the trunk beneath his bed. From it, he pulled out a revolver in a leather holster and a box of ammunition. The iron was old but kept clean, wrapped in oiled cloth and memory. He strapped it to his hip. Shannon watched him from the doorway. "You've fought before," he said. "Too many times. You going to fight them now?" Elias paused with his hand on the grip. Then he looked at the boy. "Only if they leave me no other choice." The riders didn't stop at the edge of the property this time. They came straight down the hill, hooves thundering across the soft, wet soil. They spread out as they approached the house, forming a half circle around the porch. Elias stepped out first, arms down, palms empty. The man in front, a thick-chested rancher with a red face and a missing front tooth, spoke. "You harboring that Comanche boy again?" Elias didn't answer. The man leaned forward on his saddle. "We gave you a warning. You chose to ignore it." One of the men behind him pulled a flask from his coat, took a swig, and spit it on the ground. Another cracked his knuckles around the grip of his rifle. Elias held their gaze. "The boy's not your problem." "The boy's a sign," the leader growled. "Where there's one, there's more. That tribe's been riding close, scouting us, maybe setting up for a raid. They were here for peace. Maybe they were. Maybe next time they ain't." Shannon stepped out behind Elias. He didn't say a word, but his sudden appearance caused half the rifles to rise in twitching hands. Elias stepped in front of him, body shielding the boy. "He's 10 years old," Elias said. "You gonna shoot a kid?" The leader sneered. "He's old enough to carry a knife. Old enough to bring trouble." A shot rang out. But it wasn't fired. It was fired into the sky, a warning blast. Elias had drawn faster than anyone expected, pointing his revolver into the air before anyone else had even raised theirs. The silence that followed was deep and wide. "You shoot at this house," Elias said slowly, "and you'll have to climb over me to get inside it." One of the younger men laughed nervously. "You and what army?" The trees answered. From the line of cedars at the edge of the field they appeared. Dozens of riders. Comanche, silent, watchful, motionless as statues on horseback. No war cries, no banners, just presence. Chief Tacoma rode at the front, cloak trailing behind him like smoke. His expression was carved from the same stone as his name. Behind him, warriors held bows, spears, and rifles. Not drawn, not raised, but ready. The settlers turned in their saddles, hands twitching toward weapons. Elias's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "You want a war?" he said. "Start it here. Start it now. But know this, these people didn't come to kill you. They came to protect me. Because I saved one of their own, and they're doing the same." The leader spat in the dirt. "You think this means anything? That we're just going to forget what they've done to us?" A woman's voice spoke from the line of warriors. It was calm, old, full of fire. "What have we done, white man, that you haven't done tenfold back?" She wore a bone necklace, her hair braided with red thread. Her horse stood still beneath her like it knew the weight of the moment. The settlers didn't reply. No one moved. Shannon walked forward again. Elias reached to stop him, but the boy shook his head. He stepped past the porch, past Elias's outstretched hand, and moved into the space between the two sides. Just a boy, barefoot, soaked, small, but brave. He stood in the clearing, lifted his hands, and spoke in English. "My name is Shannon, son of Chief Tacoma. I was saved by this man when I was dying. He gave me food, shelter, safety." His voice didn't shake. "We did not come to hurt anyone. We came to say thank you. My father taught me that a man who shows mercy deserves honor. not bullets. He looked at the settlers, not with hate, with something closer to pity. You have children, too. Would you let them die in the mud just because someone looked different? The silence was longer this time. Elias looked at the boy, his jaw clenched to keep emotion from leaking out. The man with the yellow bandana was the first to lower his gun. Then another. And then, slowly, the leader's hands dropped from his saddle horn. He didn't dismount, didn't apologize. But he turned his horse. "This ain't over," he muttered. "You bought yourself some time, McGraw. That's all." Elias didn't speak. He just watched them ride away. Tacoma rode forward, stopping beside the boy. "You have spirit, my son," he said. Chinan looked up at Elias. "I learned it from him." They left by dusk. No fire, no songs, just the sound of hooves fading into the wind. Elias stood alone again. The porch was wet, the house quiet. But he didn't feel alone, not this time. He looked down at the carving still sitting where it had always been, the warrior on the horse. The bow no longer pointed toward an enemy. It pointed toward a future. Sometimes, the most powerful stand a man can take isn't with a rifle, but with his heart. Elias McGraw didn't just rescue a child. He reached across a history of pain to plant the first seed of peace. In a land where blood was often the only language spoken, it was a boy's courage and a rancher's silence that proved something greater, that honor, compassion, and sacrifice still had a place under the wide-open skies of the West. If this story moved you, imagine what other tales still wait beneath the dust and silence of the frontier. Subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where legends are reborn and every sunset brings a new heartbeat to the untamed West. Don't miss the next chapter of bravery, sacrifice, and love, etched into the soul of the wilderness. Hit that button and ride with us into the stories that shaped a nation.